Well, there's an International Thomas Merton Society.
Okay.
And that's an international organization, and they have chapters worldwide. And I think there's about 26 of them, maybe just in the United States, and then maybe a couple dozen around the world, New Zealand, Australia, Europe. And these people meet monthly. They have every 2 years they have a convention. Next year they're having their convention in I think San Diego or Santa Barbara, California. But they are a group that promotes Merton, and they share books about Merton, and there's also books that keep coming out by Merton because he wrote so much. A lot of his papers, they'll gather some things together every once in a while and put out another book by Thomas Merton. So his things are still being published, and there's books about him. And the International Thomas Merton Society is about promoting Thomas Merton and his writings. And they have down there. His monastery was in the Abbey of Gethsemane, and there's a college nearby, Bellarmine University, which is a Catholic college, and they have a library where part of the library is called the Merton. I think it's called the Thomas Merton Center, and the Thomas Merton Center has a collection of all of his writings. They even have some artifacts like his clothing and some things that were found a few years ago. So. And they have a big collection of photographs. And I mean, so if you're going to do any research on Thomas Merton, we want to get in touch with them. And the director down there of the Merton Center is Dr. Paul Pearson, and he was very helpful to me the whole time. I mean, I would always call him when I was looking for a document or something, and he would guide me and shared things with me because he knew what I was doing this research on Merton's death. I also found these papers from all over the place. I found papers out at Northwestern University. I found papers at the University of Virginia, and also up at Columbia University in New York City. So I did a little traveling, collecting some documents. I even found documents that they didn't have at the Merton Center, and then I gave them to Dr. Pearson. He was thrilled. He's always trying to add to the collection, So when I would find something he didn't have, he was pretty excited. But he would help me find things, so he was a real partner kind of in helping me do my research.
And we're here today with Hugh Turley, and he's an author of the book, The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton. You can find his work also, too, at FBIcover-up.com, where he talks about the murder of the death of Vince Foster. The official version is it's a death, or a suicide, but we know more than that. Mr. Turley, why don't you give us the official version first of how we lost Thomas Merton, and then we can get into your investigation, what your conclusion was.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to tell you. I was, whenever I look at something like this, like I did with the Foster case, I remember John Clark, Patrick Doan's attorney, said, we got to go back to the beginning. So I was curious about the official documents. He died in Thailand, in a small town outside of Bangkok, and I wanted to know if there was a death certificate, if there was a doctor's coroner's report, or if they had any records of any police investigation. I wrote to the Abbey, to one of them and asked them about these documents, if they had any documents. And he wrote back and told me, this monk wrote back and told me he'd identified the body when it came back, and he told me a number of things, but he didn't tell me anything about any of the questions I asked. He didn't answer any of them. And that later I found out that this Archbishop of Milwaukee, Rembert Weekland, who was involved in this pedophile scandal in Milwaukee and was forced to resign, he wrote a memoir, and I was plugging his book on the radio station. I heard him say that he was present when Merton died. And I thought, wow, this guy was there? Really? And you're involved in a scandal? I mean, tell me more. So I got in touch with Rembert Weekland, and he was pretty nice on the phone. And I told him I was interested in Merton's death, and he said he had documents. I said, really? So he mailed me documents from Thailand. He mailed me a doctor's certificate, which was a coroner's report, and a death certificate in the Thai language and in English. Both documents were in Thai and English. They'd been translated by the U.S. Embassy. And these were official documents that he brought back from Thailand in 1968, and he held them all these years. And they were yellowed paper, but after I looked at them, I said, would you like them back? He said, no, you can keep them. I don't need them anymore. Well, then I contacted the National Archives, where I'd done research before, because Merton died overseas, I thought the State Department might have some records, and they did. They had the doctor's certificate, the death certificate, Thai language, English language, but they were different from Weakland's copies. They weren't exactly the same. And there was also a report that was issued by the U.S. Embassy, which was the only U.S. government document on his death. It was titled "The Report of the Death of an American Citizen." And interestingly, all of these documents say that he died of cardiac arrest. It was a heart attack. And I also, in my research, found a police report, which is a very interesting document because it has no one's signature on it. It has no date. It has no title. It's just called the police report. And it came with a cover letter to the monastery, but they don't have a copy anymore. It eventually moved around to I found a copy at the Merton Center, one at Northwestern University. But all of these documents, including the police report, said he died of cardiac failure. And the police report went so far as to say that after he had the heart attack, he fell into a fan. After he died, he was dead. The dead priest fell into the fan. And this is the official story. And the official documents, well, some of them say he had an autopsy. The death certificate said he had an autopsy. And the doctor's coroner's report said the body was taken to the hospital for the autopsy. But one of the doctor's reports, the one from the archives, has a note at the bottom by the counselor at the U.S. Embassy that says, well, it actually wasn't taken for an autopsy at the hospital. So that's not true. What's written on this document, in other words, is not true. So you get the official Thai document saying he had an autopsy. You got an embassy official saying, no, he didn't have an autopsy. In fact, he really did not have an autopsy because the body was never removed from the Red Cross Center there where he died in Bangkok. He was at a conference of Christian monks, mostly Benedictines. And so the official story is heart attack. And some of the official documents say autopsy, but of course that was not actually done. Now, that's sort of what this was not what was reported in the American papers at the time. This was what was reported in the Thai papers. Thai newspapers carried the story that Merton died of a heart attack. But right off the bat, in the United States and the rest of the English-speaking world, and in Europe, I guess you could say that they reported that Thomas Merton died of an accident. They called it an accidental electrocution with a fan. And that became the story. It originated in the press. And if you look at the original stories that were reported in the American newspapers, they were based on an anonymous Catholic source. So you've got that's the story that took root in this country, is that he died of an accident, and it's from an anonymous source. And that's been repeated by scholars from Notre Dame, every Catholic college professor that teaches this stuff, and they all say, and the books have been written, and there've been a lot of books written, and whenever they mention Merton's death, he died of accidental electrocution. But most people don't get electrocuted by a household appliance. I mean, we use toasters and hair dryers and all kinds of things, electric iron, vacuum cleaners. I mean, these things just don't kill people. Yeah. It's not very unusual to be killed by a fan. So in 1973, the story changed. And Brother Patrick Hart, who was the secretary for Merton at his monastery, wrote a postscript to a book of Merton's journal when he traveled to Asia. And in the postscript to the journal, Merton's Journals of Asia, he wrote that Merton took a shower. And then after he took the shower, he tried to move a fan or adjust the fan, and he was wet, of course, see, from the shower. So the water, electricity, it makes more sense. And then the story became that he died of accidental electrocution after taking a shower. Well, people repeated it, and they repeated it in books. Some books say he was in a bathtub, and he touched the fan, or the fan fell into the bathtub. He slipped in the bathtub and grabbed the fan. Some people say he slipped getting out of the tub and grabbed the lamp. They say a radio fell into the tub. I mean, and the stories, there must be 50 different stories. It's incredible. When you go to look up Thomas Merton's death in these books, and they all repeat it in any different way they want, and some of them even have the date wrong. He died on December 10th. I had a Dominican monk, and their motto is Veritas, which is truth. A Dominican monk, Father Jacob Restrick, is a nice guy, but he wrote in a book that Merton died on December 5th after he slipped in the tub and touched the lamp. So it's incredible.
I'd love to see some crime scene photos with the shower and there's a lamp in there and a radio and a fan. Like different.
Well, there are
photos. Oh, there are. Okay.
There are photos. Yeah, let me tell you about the photos. I'm glad you brought that up because you would wonder, what about now go back to the original Thai documents I mentioned. None of those documents say anything about a shower or any of that. They do mention the fan. See, when he was found, he was on the floor with a fan lying across his body. So that's how we were told he was found. But I found letters from people that were actually there. They described the scene. These are the people that first arrived at the scene. And the first three people to find the body were three Benedictine monks, and they were the first ones to enter the room. And when they went into the room, one of them's name was Egbert Donovan. He turned to the other two monks and said, "Don't touch anything. He's already dead." I mean, he could see he's dead, so don't touch anything. And then the second monk turned to the third one, who was a Filipino named Celestine Say, and he said, "Go get your camera and take some pictures." He said, "We can show the police how we found him." So the Filipino goes to his room, which is just across the hall, and these rooms were divided by a screen, like a mesh screen, and just some bed sheets hung for curtains. So auditorially, he was in the same room as Merton. They could hear everything. He could hear Merton's footsteps. But that was just for privacy. They had the screen was for mosquitoes, and the sheets were hung for privacy. But essentially, they're in the same room. So he's very close by. But he goes and gets his camera, and he takes two pictures. And back in '68, before we had these cell phones, you had to have a flash bulb to shoot a picture indoors,
right,
for the light. But he didn't have a flash. He set his light meter, adjusted two different settings, took two pictures, and one of them came up pretty dark. It was underexposed. But the other picture came up very nice. And the idea of taking the pictures was to show the police what they found, because it didn't look right to them. In fact, Edgar Donovan wrote in a letter that he did not believe Merton could have touched that fan and landed with his hands in the position they were found. And I wasn't allowed to publish these pictures because they're owned by the monastery, but I can describe them to you. And that Merton was found lying flat on his back with his arms at his side and his palms down. Now, this is, if a person falls, and I showed these photos to my doctor, and actually two doctors, and they just shook their heads and said, nobody falls like that. Because if you fall down, you usually go down in a heap, your knees buckle and you go down, and you don't land flat on your back with your arms at your side. If anything, if you fell backwards, you probably throw your arms out to try to break the fall. But you don't land with your arms like you're at attention. It would be, that's very odd, the position of the body. And that's why these monks saw this. It doesn't look right. How did the fan get there?
Was he in a bathroom?
Well, he was not in a bathroom. He was in a cottage, and he was in his room.
Okay.
And his room had a half bath. There was a half bath in his room, which had a toilet and a sink. And then he had to go outside of his door to get into the parlor area where there was another room with a shower. So, and he was also wearing pajamas. He had on a pair of short pajama bottoms, like you'd wear in the summer.
Right.
Not long pajamas like you wear in the winter, but this is Bangkok and it's hot. So he had a pair of like Bermuda short type baggy shorts that were they were described as pajamas. And he was found. I mean, you don't take a shower in your pajamas. You don't bathe in your pajamas. I mean, the water thing that was invented in 1973 does not go with these photographs. So when the photographs, what happened to them when the police came is they could see this was not a real investigation because Merton had a bleeding wound on the back of his head. And the police said, "Oh, this is a heart attack. Let's just make it simple. We don't have stubborn problems here." And nobody believed it was a heart attack. The people that were at the conference and the people in the body, they thought this isn't good, So they didn't give them the pictures. Besides, the Filipino had pictures of himself with the famous Thomas Merton. And he had pictures that he'd taken at the conference. He didn't want to give up his film. He just said, I'm not going to give him these pictures. So he took the pictures back to the Philippines, and when they were developed,